It's the February, we are the February 24th meeting of the Town Subcommittee of the Expenses and Revenues Committee that has been looking at, the challenge of our current budget situation in the town and our current revenue situation in terms of the gap between the revenues and the ongoing expenditures. And we are working under the auspices of a larger group, the Expenses and Revenues Committee. I like to call it the committee as a whole, just to differentiate. And we're at the point in the work we have been doing where we're really called upon to come up with some kind of formulation of a recommendation as to what we think should be the calculation of any necessary override any override question to be put on a ballot based on what we know to be the case in terms of the current expenses, if we were to continue all operations as is, and the current revenues, if there is no magic bullet to suddenly increase our revenues. And I'm going to actually, this is all very spur of the moment because I've been trying to draft this morning. Nicole's with us, right?
Nicole's with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicole. I'm going to send to you right now a Word document in hopes that you can put it up on the screen, and then we can get some input from the members of the subcommittee and most importantly from staff. I don't want this meeting to be a waste of staff's time. And they can tell me later if they thought it was. But in the meantime, I think it'd be worthwhile having a discussion. It doesn't have to be the document that I'm about to send to Nicole, but it has to be something like that will come out of this committee. That's my kind of sense of things. And if everyone will just pause with me for a second, I'm going to send it to Nicole and Janet and Chaz. Who else wants
I'll
to?
be able to, every time I try to split my screen and see two things, I lose the meeting, but I'll see if I can pull it up on my phone.
Well, of course, Nicole can put it up on the screen, but I do think it's useful for people to have it in front of them. And so for that purpose, I'm kind of sending it to everybody, but it'll take me just a second.
Janet, I don't know, your microphone is a little quiet. Like I can hear John well, but I'm having trouble hearing you. And when I turn up the volume, then John is very loud and you are very quiet.
I tend to turn my volume down because you all sound loud to me. So is this better? I just turned me up.
Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. I never like loud noises.
Yeah.
I have some things I'd like to explore with Chaz, and maybe just put to rest. We never got the stuff from Erin on the roads, and I think at this point, if we were to have it and decide that you should put money more in roads, we would have to say where we take it from or increase the amount that you're requesting. So I would suggest that as a committee, we just say, we consider this something that needs to be further explored by the town. We recognize that you think such and such is going to happen and put that to rest. But I
apologize. Erin is just we've
I
jumped.
don't know what she's been up to.
Yeah, Erin hasn't slept in 36 hours, so I don't want to put that on her.
I have some questions though for you in trying to whittle down the 5.3. So the first thing is that continued maintenance of service, which is about 1.2. I'm doing this from memory, but I've looked at it enough that I've memorized the numbers, and Charlie can correct me. So that 1.2, and I'm thinking in terms of should we spread it across rather than asking for the whole amount at once. There's like 900,000 for the first year because you've shown 300,000 moving across. I interpret that as death by 1,000 cuts. There are no staff in there, but what kinds of services are in there? And if there were a decision to reduce the town ask, what kinds of things would be in there?
Oh, I mean, that the problem is that is staff, right? Like that continuity of service is to keep the staff online, right? That's the difference between cutting 5 positions, or really, cutting 3 positions and moving 2 positions onto soft money, or cutting 11.4 positions and eliminating those
Right,
6 positions.
because in the, there's no bodies that are right next to that number, so that's why I was asking the question. So that is all staff,
But that's
okay?
pretty much all staff. There's like, I can show you the 2 charts of like yes override, no override. They're both
Oh,
in the
no, they're
budget
in
book.
my head unless somebody else here wants to see them. So
Yeah,
that
but I
was,
mean, so that's the big difference. There are a couple of like service line items that go up, but that's a vanishingly small portion of it. Really, the bulk of that money is in people.
is in people, okay. And then the 600K for bringing back the police officers, could that be spread instead of all 6 at once? Thinking again of the impact on the taxpayers' wallet. And
Theoretically, you could do two, two, and two. I will talk to the chief about how that would work as a practical matter. Again, the question is, are you being penny wise and pound foolish in terms of overtime?
okay, I mean, that's
Um,
why I'm asking the questions so that
yeah,
we
and it's
understand.
not a bad question. Not a bad question. There are no bad questions.
And then, because for me, it seems like we're talking about contractual obligations where this is a sort of contractual obligation, but the police department, the union had been told at the time, and they've lived for a year without those 6 positions. The overtime in the fire department, as much as people don't like it, and there are issues with it, it's going to happen. You can pull it out of the budget. That's what's been done over the last 5 years. It didn't get budgeted for, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. The 375 for the DPW staff, um, to enforce the bylaw, you either need the staff or you need to change the bylaw, but I don't see any way around that. And then the other DPW people are an investment in the future, although that's something that would happen the next year, but that whole nice thing of solar energy sort of is dependent on those around. The 300K, I have a note here that I don't understand. 350 for money.
The collective bargaining reserve, I
Collective
assume.
bargaining, thank you, that's what I
Yep.
couldn't read. That's also a sanity type thing. You're negotiating with 5 unions right now, all the AFSCME unions.
Yep.
And we have police and fire renew fairly soon, police
Right.
end this year, fire next year.
Correct.
That's a sanity issue. That's what my little scribble says. And then the 300 equity for police is what I wrote down, both for the command, but also that dispatch. So if you don't get to replace the dispatch system that they have, does that impact on efficiency and ultimately safety if they can't get people where they go?
I mean, I mean, this is one of those things that we have to do, right? Like once they stop, so the company that we currently use, Larimore, is a very small shop out of St. Louis. They're good. They've been very helpful to us. They're responsive in terms of things, but the chief says, we have 2 concerns. One is the current version of the system that we have, they're going to stop supporting at some point. So it's like, when you run an old version of Windows, like,
Oh,
okay,
trust me, I've
eventually.
run it, Chaz. I don't
Yes,
replace my
I know. I
computer
know you
very
have. I'm
often.
just, for the benefit of our television audience, once they stop supporting it, that's it. There are no patches. There's no up, and if God forbid there's a security issue, they're not going to fix it. And then we run the risk of having a system that's not safe. And IT has said, we have a very strong IT cybersecurity system that works in conjunction with the public safety departments. And their position is, if it's not safe, you can't use it. Like
Yeah,
we won't even let you plug it in. So we have to have the money to upgrade the dispatch and the content management system. And the problem is, it costs more money. If we were to buy the next version of Larimore, the current version of Larimore, it would cost more money, not just to buy, but to maintain the license. And if we went out to market, it would cost more money. So that's a big part of it. The other thing that the chief's worried about is that they're a small operation, right? Someone will buy them. One of the bigger companies will buy them, and then we'll just lose access to it anyway. So it's going to have to happen at some point in the next 3 years. Now, does it have to happen next year? Theoretically, no. We could limp along with Larimore for a year, and that might spread some of this money out. But it's a matter of when, not if, that we wind up losing support for it. And I would rather us be ready, because remember, we have to go out and procure. We have to go through the procurement process. We have to.
And the other things that I see, I'm on record, I don't know who I said it to, but I will defend to the death the money for transportation for seniors. It is critical for them. I don't see how you can tell Charlie Simmons not to do what he has to on the buildings, and he's paying for those services more as consultants if he needs to bring someone in. So that's another penny wise, pound foolish.
Yeah.
Same thing with the clerk's office. You said that if he doesn't hire a person, he's paying hourly rates to someone to do the same thing, and we know how backlogged they are.
Right.
I think that's the whole list that I did from memory. Oh, and IT, again, needing those licenses, they cost more every year.
Right.
Potential loss of funds from the feds or actual loss, not sure which is which. So basically, I went through the list because I know John's going to say, how much do we think the traffic will bear? And I can't see where these things can be anything on here that you can cut without creating problems. That's my
Okay,
take on it, and I turned it over to whomever else.
So Janet, if you don't mind, that sounds like a good place to maybe turn to the discussion of this draft document that I just circulated with a bunch of folks, hopefully with everyone who's at this meeting. I would find it helpful to discuss these questions. I hope others would also find it helpful. And Nicole, if possible, you could maybe get that up on the screen, but everybody does have should have a copy of the document if it's easier just to read it off of your own, not necessarily read it off of the screen that Nicole is preparing, but simply read it off of what I sent you. So here's why I prepared this document. Keeping in mind, that Janet and Jesse have done a very thorough job of kind of going over the information as provided as to the situation we're in. And so, I start from the notion that we're not going to second guess, what the administration says is the root cause and the numbers that contribute to the situation that we're in. And Janet and Jesse have done a very good job of recapitulating all of that. And so that we start with, we accept this as the recapitulation of where we are. But we don't attempt to make it a document that goes into the fine points of what should be, saved if an override is on the ballot, or what should be, sacrificed to get an override on the ballot that isn't, beyond a number that the voters might accept. We leave that, to the judgment of our very good departmental staff and administrator. We just start from a point of agreeing, that these are the parameters of why we are where we are. And then we move from there, and that moves to sort of the second bullet point. So then what ought to be the parameters of the amount that we determine to put on the ballot in the form of an override request? And I came up with these notions, and I really do want to hear people's responses to this. The fundamental part of this is that 2.5% ought to be taken sort of seriously as an indicator of both the ceiling on future increases in operating budgets, and on this, and as a starting point for how we figure out what is tolerable to taxpayers. Now we've been increasing the tax levy at an increase of greater than 2.5% for quite some time now, and the consequence, for a lot of homeowner taxpayers in particular, has been homeowner annual tax bills that have been growing at 4 or 5, maybe 6%, and we're calculating, what should be the override ask in the context of there's already been this trend of some pretty hefty increases in recent years in annual property tax bills paid by homeowners, but paid by everybody essentially, whether you're a homeowner or not. So what should we try to bring to the discussion of the next override question in terms of what do we think is the max? What it obviously is going to need to be something over and above 2.5%. If 2.5% was enough, we wouldn't be here. But can it really be something as sizable after the recent increases we've already had? Can it really be something as sizable as yet another year or 2 years or 3 years of annualized 5% growth in tax bills? Is that too much? If that's not enough, is 5.5% too much? Is 4.5% enough? So I do think there has to be some way of figuring out, what boundaries do we want to put on any override question that goes on the ballot, and the means of calculating those boundaries that I've come up with. It's very crude, I admit, but it starts with the notion that we kind of take new growth out of the equation because it comes in at about more or less 1% on top of the 2.5%, and we know we're going to need to fund capital improvements, and sometimes we have a little wiggle room in how much we commit to capital improvements. So instead of being at risk of a bad year for new growth, suddenly creating a operations crisis, just commit the new growth to capital improvements and stay at 2.5% as the sort of basis for calculating what do we need in addition for our operating budgets, and also as the basis for what is the expectation of taxpayers as to the overall boundary of what might be their anticipated increases in their tax bills in the next 3 years if there's an override. So it's got to be something more than 2.5%, but less than what? And as to the less than what, I don't have that in this memo. I sort of bring us right up to the edge of getting at that less than what. But first, I want to know, what in addition might we add? So I think you have to, factor in inflation and assume that if general inflation in municipal operating budgets, and there are, inflation indicators that get published by various people, and we would have to pick one. But if general inflation is more than 2.5%, well, that's an obvious one. We should ask for the difference between the 2.5% and the general inflation. But beyond that, can we hold the override dollar amount to what is required to take care of fixed costs? And that's the big question here. The benefits and the debt service, everyone has agreed, are the major drivers of the situation we're in right now. So, what would it require in terms of a dollar amount in an override question to make up the difference between 2.5% additional in the benefits and debt service accounts and the actual fixed cost of the benefits and debt service accounts? I'm going to stop there just to get some reaction, especially from staff, as to whether, where they think this would end up. Would it end up with a $10 million override question, a $13 million override question, a $20 million override question. But regardless of where it ends up, is it a good starting point for how to calculate an override amount?
Let's get her hand up, and I guess I want to let her talk, and then I can talk a little bit about this.
Yeah. Who's got a hand up?
Janet does.
Oh, Janet, go ahead.
I just wanted to throw out that the total, a lot depends on the schools. So the town, based on the number I got from Lincoln, which I think is accurate, I look at the 5.3 million is 1.6% increase in the levy total. That can be all at once or slightly spread out, but the bulk is once. That part of my questions to Chaz this morning, could we get it down to just one? And I think that that's doable in a year. But we don't know what the school need is. I had a phone call from Dick Benka on Sunday. He said they haven't seen the details yet. And that's the big question, John, because that's been the big driver in previous overrides. And the debt service is just there. It is covered by at least the large debt is excluded. So it's covered, it's coming out of your pocket, but you're not, well, you're adding to it only because you already voted to approve it. And so I'm not sure how far we can go here. It's a great question for the rest. I have no way of judging what voters will vote for. In my circles, all I hear is, but the schools, but the schools, but the schools. And I appreciate the chance that we are one town. I say the same thing. And they're asked, to the extent that we know it, per year is what Chaz is asking for over 3. So it's a tolerance issue, which makes it a political issue. John, I throw it back at you and the select board. If we had started this year the way you did the last time by saying, this is how much money there is, we're giving so much to the town, so much to the schools, they'd be further ahead. The schools would at least have a ceiling to butt up against. And I don't see that they've had that. And I haven't paid any attention to it, so I could be 100% wrong.
Okay.
Right? So
Well,
that's
I mean,
my thing.
yeah,
That's my thing.
yeah, to be clear, my assumption here is that anything that we agree, to as the town subcommittee, would be a model for what the schools should also be held to. So, I mean, that's a discussion to be had with the committee as a whole.
So
Once they hear from the school subcommittee.
So you're
But
just looking at this percentage for our side? Because I was thinking you were asking for what's the tolerance in total.
Well, yeah, I think we have to have that discussion, but I think we first have to agree on what do we think is a reasonable parameters in terms of the town side, from the town perspective. If this is a problem of rampant increases in fixed costs, the benefits, and I'm going to treat them as fixed, even though they're kind of not really, because they stem from contract negotiations. But let's just assume that is what it is. Benefits is what it is. Debt service is what it is. I have a feeling, and I haven't done the math, but I have a feeling that if you just hold whatever we ask for to the difference between what they are now growing at and what they would grow at 2.5%, it'll come somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 10 to $13 million, but maybe my math is completely off. I don't know. I'm anxious to hear from others too.
And John, I think you're more or less, I think your back of the envelope numbers are more or less right, in that if you were to try and do that as a total, that would be your total override number. And then I think but the difference there is then what are you considering truly fixed costs, right? Healthcare is the largest of them. To Janet's point, when we talk about debt service is really the thing that puts us in the bind. Because when you talk about what taxpayers are willing to support right now, if no override passes, no override is even put on the ballot, people's taxes are going to go up on average by 5.1% next fiscal year. And that's because 2.5 new growth and debt service, excluded debt, the stuff that people voted for in the past and is now coming home to roost in their tax bill. And that makes this conversation very fraught, because in the past, we've had this sort of rule of thumb, well, we don't want people's taxes to go up by more than 10% in any given override proposal, but people's taxes are already going up 5.1% no matter what. So it doesn't leave you with a lot of wiggle room if your goal is to have the total be 10%. So it's a bind. And I think so when we talk about what are fixed costs, right? Healthcare is the biggest one. And then you think about things like, IT's budget and so forth. You think about things, the service budgets and some of the other departments. You think about, and then the other big thing that I would just try and think through here is, if you assume new growth goes to capital improvement, okay, that's, as you said, it's roughly 1%. In good years, it's 1%. This year, we are estimating it at 0.8, I think, between 0.7 and 0.8 for FY27. And our policies, as currently reduced, suggested going forward, say that we should be spending 6% of last year's net revenue on capital improvements. So you get 1%, you get 1% of that out of new growth, and then the other 5% of that has to come out of the existing levy. And so I think it's important to realize that 1%, while it's good to say, okay, we're dedicating that to capital expenditures, is not enough. Really, when you look at the proposed FY27 budget, we're proposing to spend, when you factor in everything, close to 10% on of net prior year's revenue on capital improvements. And that's because the needs are so acute, and because even in a rough year, our current policies say that when you spread it across debt and revenue, we should be spending roughly 8.1% of our total funds on capital improvements, of our budget on capital and capital expenditures. So we get there this year. A part of how we get there is we spend overlay funds, which is very specific one-time money. But so be that as it may, capital expenses are going to continue to put pressure on the budget above and beyond new growth. And we just have to factor that in when we think about that. So I think this is an interesting proposal to talk about in terms of long-term financial sustainability, but I think it requires, one, an acknowledgement that capital costs are regularly going to be exceeding that new growth number, and that because it's a percentage of revenue, it's going to be, there are going to be pressures on the budget there, particularly as the needs expand. Right? The 2008 override talked about an inflator for repair and maintenance over and above 2.5%, and I think that's a area we might want to go back and look at. Then there's this broader question of what is a fixed cost. I think you hitting on healthcare is a good place to start. One of the areas of potential reform on Prop 2.5 is to look at a model similar to New Jersey's, which exempts healthcare from their 2.5% calculation. Basically says your taxes can only go up by, I don't know what the baseline number is in New Jersey, but it's that plus new growth plus the delta between whatever that is and the cost of providing employee benefits. So that may be a more equitable way to look at it statewide. And in the interim, it may be a more fair way to look at kind of a touchstone for override proposals, saying we're doing this as kind of a base and thinking about how we should move forward on that. But I would just want to be sure that in thinking about that, we have a true picture of what those fixed costs are, repair and maintenance being one of them. Utilities and so forth. Those are important things to take into consideration here. So I don't think this rubric is a bad rubric. I think it's one that we should really be thinking about, and explaining to people why that graph always looks the way that it does, right? That, that graph that looks like the gradually widening structural deficit, and what we are doing to try and control for it, and what costs are unavoidable and therefore things that we have to go to the voters for, and what things are simply, well, it would be nice to have this, and so we're asking you for more money. And that's really where, on the town side, we're trying very hard to be clear with folks that this is not a question of things that are nice to have. It is a question of things that either put the town on firmer footing going forward, things that the community has highlighted that they view as vital to our success, or that are the basics, right? How do we provide the services that we're providing now? So, you know, I would just also highlight one thing, which I want to put in the packet because I know he couldn't be here, which is Jesse's email that he sent last night. I asked Nicole to add that to the public packet, because I think it does. It talks a lot about, concerns that I think are. I'm sorry, you can hear my children yelling at me in the background. I'm going to try and mediate that dispute while we talk about this. So
You lose.
yeah, I know. I try and keep the peace both at home and at work. Sometimes it's easier at work, sometimes it's easier at home. Anyhow, the excuse me for 1 second. I'm sorry, guys. Can you be quiet, please? I'm talking on the phone here. Art and Sebastian, please be quiet. I'm talking on the phone. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I muted myself, but I didn't.
No, it's okay. We're not
Yeah,
hearing them too much.
Okay,
I'm not.
sorry.
Yeah, I'm not hearing them. Yeah.
Okay, so okay.
Can I say something while you're
Yes,
collecting
sure.
your
Go ahead.
thoughts?
Yes.
Yeah. I think one of the keys here is there needs to be a rubric, I mean, the rubric can't be whenever we are in a crisis because, our ongoing expenditures for another year are going to way exceed our revenues for next year. We'll just take, whatever the amount is that's needed to cover the shortfall and put it into an override question. And we'll offer people that, maybe the override question will include a couple of things that they will definitely sacrifice before we formulate the override question. But mostly it'll be an override question so that we can keep going the way we've been going, which has been leading to these situations where year after year after year, the taxpayers are asked to share a 6% increase when they were told at one time that the reason for Prop 2.5 is it's not reasonable to expect tax bills to go up at a rate of 6% a year after year, or 5, and maybe not even 4. And can we get it down to something like 3.5? Even though the premise behind 2.5 was 2.5. But what's our rubric for sort of figuring all this out in the context of where's the limit beyond which taxpayers are just going to keep saying no to these questions?
Well, John, I
Right.
think there's some light at the end of the tunnel.
Janet, you're kind of quiet again. I'm not sure why your audio keeps dropping, but
I'll go closer. Is that better?
yeah, lean in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
lean in.
So part where the light at the end of the tunnel is once we've paid off or brought the liability for pension down, that's a $40 million drop. That's why we passed something that said, look at it. I'm not sure I would have looked at it the same way. But there will be $40 million that needs to somehow be figured in to titrate into the ongoing costs. And you can't.
Yeah,
do it all-
we've already
Right,
contributed that
but that's what I'm saying.
to OPEBs.
You have
Yeah.
that. If you put it all in OPEBs, then you're gonna have $40 million to deal with at the end of 4 years, when you pay that off, which is not a good thing. But you can, where the resolution that the larger committee passed is to say, take a look at what you said you're gonna do, figure out a plan that reduces the OPEB liability, but allows monies that's flexible, that we can deal with these things that come up, because the spike in health insurance hopefully won't last forever, but who knows? And as Chaz said, he sees some money, about $4 million in 2030, because the non-excluded debt, some of that gets to be paid off. And the pension liability drops slightly. So for me, that means maybe this is the last one for a while, although you can't make promises. And that needs to be part of the rubric. What we're seeing is Prop 2.5 made a promise that is not sustainable, because things just don't go up 2.5% at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't know that we can make promises. I think we need to, in our report, point out, we see, a way to get out of this recurring cycle that we're in, but we got to get to the end of it. So to me,
Yeah.
it comes down to, are you going to make the cuts you're going to have to make if it fails? And I think that that's, from everyone I talk to, it's a possibility. Everybody's worried about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when this reaches the level of the committee as a whole, we'll all have a vote on this. I mean, maybe it'll be a choice between something like this that's in front of us and something that's, an all out, we just have to ask, everybody to accept some more pain for the next 3 years. So it's going to be, 15 million or 20 million that we're going to ask. I don't know. But I think something like this needs to be on the table for consideration. Ruth Allen, do you have anything you want to say?
I feel kind of frustrated and maybe we all do. And I think we ought to give some examples of the amounts that we're looking at in the override, and talk about that specifically, as opposed to should we do it, shouldn't we do it? Well, we have to do it, and et cetera, et cetera. That's it. That's my input.
Yeah. Okay. But I think this would be a good point to emphasize that I didn't complete this memo, and there really is a missing E and maybe even a missing F. But E is where you get to, okay, so then what if, when you do all this calculation, what if the number that you need to ask for turns out to be like, $20 million. And that would drive up the average tax bill by 8% in the next year. Then what do you do? And so E would be to find a rubric, to add to the rubric some kind of leveler which incorporates an assumed number of sort of tolerable increase in property tax bills. And then if we are in excess of that number, charges back to that 2.5% that was allowed for operating increases, and says, unfortunately, that's going to have to come out of, the 2.5% for operating increases. And I know that sounds, harsh, maybe unachievable, but so would a rejection of an override,
Right.
be extremely harsh and unachievable. So we got to kind of figure out if there's always the possibility of rejection of an override, what is the rubric we can apply that voters will look at it, say, well, I don't like having to pay that much more again, but at least this is a reasonable way of explaining why I need to pay that much more, or else we're going to, see drastic losses of some services beyond which, none of us will be happy.
Well, let me just say, I think that's right. And I think a part of what will make for success is an explanation of that. And the help voters understand the need for it and what the consequences of not getting it are. And I know it has to be
Yeah.
a little bit gentle and blah, 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 but that's the specificity of what they need.
Yeah, and Chaz, to your very good point about, well, it's going to be, another 5% increase, even without any override. Okay. And you mentioned, of course, excluded debt. In my way of thinking about this, I'm willing to specify, I would be willing to specify in the rubric that we don't use that, we don't include that in our calculation of the impact to the taxpayer. Because I think there's an argument to be made that that's a little bit like your water bill, or your, whatever, your electricity bill. But let's just say your water and sewer bill as, a town service that you pay what it costs for that service. And if voters decide to buy a new school, at a cost of some, whatever, 160, $180 million, they get the new school. And just like if they pay their water bill, they get water. So we hold that aside and try to establish a rubric for holding that aside. Then what is the maximum tolerable tax impact? That's how I would go about it.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair way to do it, right? You say we voted for it. That's been passed. It is water under the bridge. But I also think as Ruth Ellen pointed out, as a political consequence, it's gonna, people are still going to see it, right? So regardless of whether, so it's a balance that I think the committee needs to consider. I will just say the other thing that Janet brought up that I want to, I think this is a really good conversation for the full committee to have. I think particularly, folding in some of the work that the Futures Group has been doing, thinking about the long-term structural deficit and how to address it. I think would inform this discussion of how to build a rubric to explain where that delta is and what's acceptable in terms of a potential increase. But the big missing picture here is from the schools. And I hope that they're going to have that discussion tomorrow, because right now the school's number is 19.8 over 3 years. And in each year, that number is higher than the town's overall 3-year number. And we have not had the conversation yet that we have had on the town side, which is what happens if an override doesn't pass? What are the cuts that we are proposing to make? On the town side, at least, we've had that discussion, and we will continue to refine it. The select board is going to talk about it tonight. I think there's going to be some conversation. People in the community are upset when they hear, oh, we might have to close a fire company. That really gets people riled up. I get it. I do. It's not a choice that I would make voluntarily. But when the budget gap is what it is, I don't see my way clear. And I think having that discussion in public and talking it through with the select board and making sure that everyone is on the same page and understands, yep, these are the trade-offs that we have to make in these circumstances is a good way to go. We haven't done that on the
Well,
schools.
yeah, just on that point though, because I admit I bridle a little bit, when it always gets reduced to, well, then if you don't say yes, we'll have to dispose of a fire company. But we have not, and we tried, but we didn't succeed. We have not applied, any kind of measure that would deal with the fire department expenses by virtue of reducing the number of people assigned to a particular piece of equipment, and maybe do it, in several places, and thereby rein in, that $800,000 in overtime through changes in how we assign people to pieces of equipment. And so it's not so much it's either this or we lose a fire company. It could be it's either this or we try again, with an understanding on the part of the people on the other side of the negotiating table that if they keep saying no to these ways of adjusting the number of people assigned to a piece of equipment, which is done in other communities, then they're walking right into a situation where we might end up with, voters saying no, and we have to, it'll cost us a fire company.
Right.
And but again, this is something that I think the board will want to talk through, right? I understand that people bridle at it, but when you look at the numbers, it's an order of magnitude question. It's, $1.7 million of this proposed override is going towards the fire department. So if it doesn't pass, that's $1.7 million that we either have to make up in some way with cuts. And, in the same way that I get pushback from other departments when I talk about the problems that the schools are facing, people say, "Oh, why are we suffering for the schools' mistakes, et cetera, et cetera?" And I try and explain why that's not the case and why we're all, it's not a zero-sum game, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to start pitting departments against each other. And that's what I really worry about here is if we start having that discussion of, well, what else can we cut? The three biggest drivers, the three biggest departments in the town are the fire department, police department, and the Department of Public Works. And they are the three biggest recipients of money in this proposed override package, because people value their services and we want to be providing the level of service the community needs when it comes to public safety, first response, roadways, snow removal, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's the bread and butter of municipal government. And so we want to do that. We want to support that. But
You know what, can I ask a question? Do we have information about if the override fails and the money is less? What are the consequences of having a lower, not meeting the budget that we are meeting for this we want to meet for this fiscal year? And what is the impact on a line by line item in the that we have? I guess I really want to be clear that people understand the consequences of an overpass failing.
we have that in the budget. The budget book that was published a week and a half ago talks about that.
Yeah.
Because we have that budget book assumes no override, right? That your baseline budget for FY27 is no override, and in practice, what that means is we lose in FY27. We lose capacity in several departments. We never get to fill those vacant police positions. We cut things people like the senior center transit program and the farmers market and stuff that people and in the long run we lose capacity to do things like sustainability, like fire suppression and so forth. So
is that articulated in a very open and understood way, in a sense?
I hope so. I hope, there's, when you look at that section in the budget book, in section 1 of the budget book, if you go to that section that's marked override, you can actually see, here it is. Here's what's going to happen if there's no override. Line by line, here's what these cuts are. And here as a practical matter is what that means. It means we're going to lose mechanic support and horticultural and labor support in DPW. So we're going to lose, we're not going to be able to meet our repair and maintenance needs in the building department. We're not, all that stuff is laid out in that way.
And
So
it's also captured in
and I will tell you, being this narrow mind that I have, I want to be able, if the override fails, I want to be able to point to that. You had this information, you didn't pay it attention, now you do.
Ruth Ellen, it's also in the draft of our report that was circulated. But John, to your point, it seems to me that the place to have the discussion is in the town school partnership meetings. I don't know, it's too late to do that now for this year, but going forward, that's where town and school come together and say, this is what we think. And then you've got, the whole town included, not just us looking at the town side of the budget with Chaz and not just Bella going through things with the school committee. But if you want to say, this is what we think the taxpayers can afford, I understand that being the select board's purview, but you also need to work it through with schools, because you can't say, too bad to them, because they have a whole different set of needs that proceed in a whole different way. That Chaz said, these are the basic things that the town has to provide. I don't understand what that is on the school sides anymore, because as a society, we have dumped so much more on the schools than just educating kids, which is what it
Yeah.
was like when I was
Yeah.
there. But I think that's the level, and we can talk about it somewhat. That's why I said if we'd had this guidance as you did in the last override, we'd be in a somewhat different place. I don't know. All I can do from my perspective here is say, have we got Chaz as narrow as we can, which is why I asked him all those questions. And, we can go round and round, but I don't know if you wanted to vote on where we are.
Well, no, as I say, I don't even have the missing E. So,
Yeah.
but I'll keep working on this memo, and there will be an E, which represents my best attempt at figuring out, how do you set sort of an upper limit, based on expectations to be placed on voters and on taxpayers. Do any of the other staff at the meeting right now want to comment on any of this? Lincoln, Charlie, maybe? No? Feel free. Lincoln just unmuted. Go
I
ahead.
think I'm looking forward to engaging on this. I think Chaz had a meaningful response in that this is a way to look at it, and here to help engage on it.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah. Charlie, anything?
Sure, John. I think my initial reaction to this was thinking to myself that this would be better discussed with the full committee, but I think I came around to your idea of setting the tone, using this as sort of the tone setter. I do agree with trying to find a way to define for the voters how we came up with an upper limit. I thought that Chaz had come up with a reasonable way of looking at it where you inflate the last override amount only because of that debt service issue he brought up, which, is not necessarily out of our control, but it is kind of a separate piece of the puzzle that when you factor that in, which this sort of does, right? It almost penalizes the town a little bit more, especially when we're talking about a good chunk of that debt service being school related as well, right? And so I do just worry about putting ourselves in this disadvantageous position where we are really hammering the town sides, total dollar amount or percent increase down as much as we can, only so that we can, see a larger amount potentially go to the school side.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no,
By some
and I don't think
significant
that,
margin, right? And I just worry about
Yeah.
negotiating with ourselves. But I think you've come up with a good system here. I'm intrigued to see where it goes. And I also think I would agree with you that there needs to be some upward bound and a determination of how we figured that out, and for it to be reasonable and understandable for voters. So I think
Yeah.
you're onto something.
Thanks, Charlie. And Chaz, basic question here. Can the school committee or the school, well, I'll just say the school committee, can the school committee put an override question on the ballot on their own say so, or does it always have to go through the select board?
You are the gatekeepers. You are the only ones who can put anything on the ballot.
Right. And that's been my assumption here. So, when I say, well, this has been prepared for the town subcommittee, but it should be a model to follow for the school side as well. But first we have to agree that it's a good model, on the town side. And we can enforce it being the model on the school side to the extent that we're the gatekeepers for what goes, on the ballot. So I think we ought to keep that in mind, in future discussions of this. We don't have to be, in the position you just described, Charlie, where, we're debating with ourselves and, and
Well,
solving the
I sort
problem
of
on
do
our own.
I do disagree a little bit, John, on this, and I agree with you. Obviously, the select board has ultimate power on the override question, but there are two other possibilities, in which an override does or does not pass, and the amount of money within that override that goes to the town or the schools is changed by town meeting between the override vote and town meeting. Right?
Yeah.
It is certainly possible. For example, we could create an override that's less than what is being asked for now. the schools could not change any of their reductions plans and then come out after the override vote and say, we need more of this money than the town's getting, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
could use these discussions as the very justifying point that, look, they had great conversations at Townie and RC and realized they could live with less, right? And so I do think, I will push back a little that I think we need to be strategic and careful about how much we, hammer down what the town is asking for before we've heard anything from the schools. I think Janet has
Yeah.
made a good point. And so you're right, but we can't, that's not how it necessarily will go. The board has ultimate
Yeah.
power over the question, but not over the budget.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so John, also.
Yeah. Go ahead, Janet.
Also, that's why I said, it would have been better at a TSP level, because that has all the deciding players. The schools can't go ahead and put anything on the ballot, but you would be, wrong to put something on the ballot without talking to them and understanding their issues. I have a further concern about the schools, lack of information so far, and that is they have a deadline for notifying staff of layoffs. And so that plan, I don't think can wait until you find out, does GIC come down because they're not going to cover weight
Yeah.
loss drugs
Yeah.
anymore,
Yeah.
or even what you guys put on the ballot. That's
Yeah.
very late. But for us here today, we have a deadline to meet, as does the rest of the committee, to get something to the select board.
Yeah.
So did you want to go through and vote? I think you have said we're not going to change what's in Chaz's request. Would we put forward the five? We're not going to trade things in and out. So do we agree with the amount? Do we agree with the format that sets up something?
Yeah. Janet, I don't think we can take that vote today with, two key members of this subcommittee, absent. So,
Then
yeah.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying, then we need to set a meeting. We thought we had one for Thursday. It somehow didn't get set up.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have to do something by,
Uh,
within a week. I don't know, and that's all.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd be content with a meeting a week from today.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You could do a
Um,
meeting, right? Yeah, you could do a meeting next Tuesday. You could do a meeting on Friday. I mean, we could leave this meeting and post a meeting for 10:30 on Thursday. It's 48 hours.
There's
So
Yeah.
another thing that I remember sort of vaguely from advisory committee, that if we didn't close the meeting, we could continue it without posting a new meeting. I don't know if
What?
that's still considered legit, but I sort of remember that. I don't know if you do, John. John Doggett's not here to chime in.
messy. I wouldn't want to risk running afoul of the open meeting law that way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't
things
think,
have gotten tighter. Things have gotten tighter, but I know that was something I'm pretty sure used to happen.
so. We'll send Nicole, an agenda for a meeting a week from today, same time, same place. I want to just share with everyone the interesting moment from the schools subcommittee, which I was just sort of observing their meeting yesterday. And Mariah, and I'm not picking a fight with Mariah on this at all, but she caught me by surprise, because she said the schools are not a department. And somebody said, well, then what are they? And well, they're the public schools of Brookline. That's who they are. And she was trying to sort of draw the line at the schools being treated as just another department, kind of like the police department, the fire department, the public works department. And I think that sort of distinction is at the core of this discussion we're having right now about, well, if we do this on the town side, what about the schools? As far, in what I wrote in this draft document, if you just assume in the any phrase that says department budgets are allowed a 2.5% annual growth for starters. In fact, I even said town and school operations. So, this is meant to apply across the board, town and school, Now, obviously there's a difference of view here as to whether we are at this point, sort of in a place where we could depend on them to go along with this. But I think we got to make the effort to all get on the same page. If this is a reasonable rubric, then we need to try to get everybody on the same page.
So John, if we continue with what's there, I'll go back to, I am confused by what you mean fixed costs. If you want to just say it's health benefits, which are beyond our control, I mean, yeah.
Well, no, I'm going with what's in, in the document, that, our annual financial plan document here that are defined as the health line and the pensions line.
Okay,
No, sorry, it's defined as the benefits line. Yeah.
okay. So we're saying, and offhand, I don't know what benefits and debt
It's
service.
those two amounts that are separated out, below the line
No,
and are
no.
growing at around 10 and 11%.
Yeah, no, what my question is, I don't know what percentage of the budget they are. I don't know how those lines would,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
not.
no, you're right. And I haven't done the math, and I'm relying on maybe some staff, input here. And what does, if staff took a look at this just as a rubric, what would they come up with as the number? Once you subtract out benefits and pensions and then figure, what's the difference between allowing them a 2.5% growth and funding what their actual growth is, then what is that number? What do we come to? So you don't have to do it now, but I think at some point we need to look at that number.
Well, is it fair to say that debt, at least at this point, if the base is going to go up 5.1%, take out the 2.5 and you said 0.8 for growth, so 5.1 minus 3.3, that's the debt part. And then I'm blanking on the benefits. So that would be the upper limit that we could say. I'm going to just pull a number out of here. Let's say it comes up to a total of 7% or whatever, or well, we subtracted out the 2.5. So and we're subtracting out the debt. So we're subtracting out 5.5 and subtracting. So it's 2.5%. I'm lost in how you've calculated this, John.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to be very, very specific here. Because I'm pretty sure I drew these numbers from
Somewhere,
no, from I had it in front of me this morning, the long range financial
Right.
plan.
No, I know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And if people go to the long range financial plan, they'll see this in the table. I don't have it right in front of me right now. But
I won't be able to pull it up on my phone. And as I said, every time I try to go to a separate screen, I lose the meeting. So I'm not going to touch it. So where are we going from here? I have made some adjustments to the red line draft, haven't heard from anybody. And I stopped short of trying to do conclusions and recommendations because we hadn't done that yet. But I can, based on our discussions today, put forth some conclusions from the town side and
yeah,
circulate those, because I really think we need to vote. If we're meeting Tuesday, we're going to need to hold a vote then. Or
yeah,
if you want to also schedule a meeting for next Thursday, just to be on the
yeah,
safe side.
yeah. So just to complete the circle here. The page 19 of the and this is just one source. You could probably get much the same number from another source.
Let's talk through this, John. So I'm sorry, is this the table you're looking at here? I'm online, sorry. Is this the right one? I'm sharing my screen.
There we go.
Well, that's not exactly the one I was referencing. Page
Okay.
19 of the long range financial plan.
Yeah,
FY
I'm on that.
27, FY 27 to FY 31.
Okay, that's what I'm looking at is the 27 to 31
Right.
of the LRFP page.
Okay, well, there was a different version of it presented at
Are
one
you
point by
looking?
Melissa. The one I'm looking at is a green and white color scheme, but yeah, the number the dollar change in 2027 is 9,797,986. The percentage change in 2027 is 10.8. That's combining pensions, group all of it. Pensions, group health, retiree group health, group life, disability insurance, workers' comp.
Are you in the 27 budget book?
No, I'm in the FY 27 to FY 31 long range financial plan. It's a
Oh,
PowerPoint.
you're in the December financial plan. I see. So that has
Yeah.
those numbers have been updated for the 27 budget book.
Yeah, sure, but I'm assuming they're still in the range of 10 to 11%.
That's not what are you looking at expenditures?
I'm looking at total for benefits.
Okay.
And benefits defined as pensions, group health, retiree group health, group life, disability insurance, workers' comp.
Right. The percentages are not shown here. I only see total expenditures.
Well, here, I'll just send a link to the
Yeah,
document.
no,
I'm
it's
looking at.
fine.
Yeah.
My issue is
Yeah.
I do think the numbers have changed a little bit. So which is okay, but anyways, the thing that I was hoping to point out is that if you look in the 27 budget book, for example, the non-departmental increase for the 27 budget is something like 10%, but this town department growth is 2.4% and the school department growth is 1.2%. So you kind of get an idea that at least on the town department side, we're within the 2.5% in a no override scenario. And so you can almost just add the 1.6% that Janet calculated as the total, as the remaining percent increase. But in any case, because we kind of already break out non-departmental in the budget book. So I think maybe a good next step for this is, okay, you've confirmed for us that you're talking about the non-departmental benefits line in the long range financial plan. You're talking about holding that separately. And then assuming 2.5% growth on base with everything else, what that number is, and then whatever that's basically where you would.
So I don't know if you have it in front of you right now, but I just sent everybody the link to the document. Okay. And on page 19, you will see there's a column for 2026. And the sum total of all of these things that are so-called, benefits and pensions, et cetera, that comes to 90,800,000. I'm just rounding here. And then in 2027, it comes to 100,600,000. So the very rough math that I did in my head was, what if 90 million had increased by 2.5%? Okay. So you take that number and you subtract it from the 100 million, and that gives you a number that might be a arguable override number, because it's over and above the 2.5% in an override. You're going to get 2.5%, okay, but to get more than 2.5%, you'd have to take 2.5% added to 90,800,000 would give you, and then you have to make up the rest in an override to get to 100,600,000.
Well, it'd be substantial, I think, actually. So that's because I think I think what we're seeing in the budget is sort of minimal growth across the board and then substantial benefits growth, right? So that represents a 12% increase from 90 to 100, right? So you can essentially So it would be 9% of the benefits line.
That's how I said it.
Go
could
ahead,
be
Chaz.
Something around 10% growth.
Lincoln's got his hand up.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Lincoln.
No, just as an aside, John, I'm curious. Have you thought about what your desired inflation factor would be, or is that preliminary?
I have thought about it, but
Just curious.
somebody came up with a municipal inflation index, which some organization of municipal governments puts out. There's also there's obviously the CPI. Um, I don't have a position on what would be an acceptable inflation index, but every time there's almost daily reports on the Federal Reserve, holding, they haven't yet achieved their target. Well, what is their target? Their target is 2%.
Hmm.
So what's our target? That's all.
What I would suggest, Charlie, if you understand what John is saying, and I still need to get my brain around it by working the numbers, is that you come up with a calculus that can be incorporated into the discussion tomorrow. Because John, you're planning to raise this with the full committee tomorrow, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so it would be helpful, since we're all scrambling with it, if you could come up with what that calculus is. Charlie, is that doable? Am I asking?
I'll need to chat with Melissa when she gets back. So just so I can confirm, we're basically saying, take the current 26 budget and revenues, assume that new growth is going to capital, take to add 2.5% to town and school operations exclusive of fixed costs, add an
Yeah.
inflation factor, and then
Well, it's not necessarily add an inflation factor. You add it's an add if inflation is more than 2.5%.
understood.
I
Yeah.
think it's an assumption that 2.5%, which is more or less where we've been. The problem being that some things you have to buy are inflating a lot faster.
Right.
And I'm thinking,
Understood. I'm just trying to follow the calculus.
no, I'm
So
saying this more to John, so.
okay.
Yeah.
So you may add an inflation factor depending on inflation in the year that we're talking about. And then you're holding the override amount to be the delta between that number that we've come up with and the growth in fixed costs.
That's the general idea. Because we keep telling people the reason overrides are inevitable is because fixed costs, health coverage, pensions, they're growing much faster than 2.5%. So okay, if that's the reason that we have to keep having overrides, then what is the amount?
And
That would make
actually,
up the
it may come
difference.
out to be around the override amount that we're discussing. So we'll
It
just
might.
I'll chat it out with I'll chat
might.
it over with Melissa. So
Yeah.
The place,
In-
John, where it breaks down, is in negotiations, where, part of what the problem on the town side is that police and fire got more than a 2.5% COLA or whatever a COLA is, and
Yeah.
those are the dollars. So, I don't know how you hold bargaining units.
Well,
Basically, we can bargain,
but Janet, that's the essential problem. It's a kind of a chicken and egg problem. And the what has to come first the next time we do a negotiation is we're going to set the expectation on our side of the table according to this same rubric, that you don't don't expect to be able to get more than 2.5% on the total cost of this contract without it being subject to an override, which if rejected, then it wouldn't be like you put the contract on the ballot, but in the long run, this is subjecting contracts to override questions. Because if an override question passes, then the voters have and the taxpayers have bought into contracts that build in these kinds of inflationary benefit costs, very inflation plus benefit costs. And if an override fails, we're going to have to, get a better agreement the next time we negotiate contracts.
I thought that was at least what I've read of the two contracts that have driven this, came out of the combined reports. And I remember in both of them, it said that the unions were aware what the other side would be and said fine. At least that's what I remember from the combined reports. So I hear where you're going, but I think it assumes a reasonableness. And then that's the town side, and the two biggest unions, of course, can go as they have and
Yeah.
arbitrate us away. And on the school side, what I understand of what you said Mariah sent you is, they're a law unto themselves, and they will continue to put this in front of the public, I guess, at town meeting if necessary. I don't know what to make of that comment.
Well, I think one of the contexts for this, by coincidence, is in the last 2 days, there have been major op-ed pieces, one in the New York Times and one by Fareed Zakaria somewhere, I'm not sure where. I think it was published in the Washington Post, actually, both arguing the exact same point, which is not a new point to be made, but it's being made more strongly than ever right now. And that is, the cost of contracts that are negotiated by municipalities, and we're talking New York City, Chicago, you name it, are driving our major cities to the brink of bankruptcy. And Brookline is experiencing somewhat, the same problem. Is that for whatever, we're not going to cast blame here on anybody, but the reality is our annualized contract costs far exceed our ability to get revenue without there being these override questions every 3 years or even more often if we're not careful. And the override questions look to be getting bigger and bigger.
Municipalities, governments in general are about the only place where unions still have clout.
That's right. That's right.
And so
it wouldn't take much, to temper what is the expectation in these negotiations to a more reasonable level. I mean, I'm sure the other side would say, no, it would take a lot.
The answer,
But the difference between a 3.5% contract and a 2.5% contract is all the difference in the world when it comes to these kinds of eventualities.
Yeah.
Lincoln wanted to
No,
jump in.
you should go ahead, Chaz. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just two things. One on this subject. Yes, and John, you raised a very good point. There's also a collective action problem here. When we went to JLMC the last time with the police, when we reached a decision, we've been in the JLMC world several times over the last couple of years, but the only time we actually got an arbitration decision was for the the prior police contract. And one of the things that they did was they compared not our ability to pay, but also what salaries of comparable communities were. And so comparable community, even if we hold the line, comparable communities may wind up hurting us. I mean, the biggest factor there that really hurt us was that to get out of civil service, not even to get out of civil service, I don't remember what they did, how they did this. Needham agreed to this stipend for post certification, peace officer certification. I said to the town manager, who was an excellent town manager, I don't begrudge her, but the political pressures of it. But I said, you guys really, you opened Pandora's box, because now all of a sudden JLMC is going to look at Needham and say, well, Needham did it, so everyone else has to do it. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as other municipalities start giving above and beyond, then all of a sudden it becomes standard, and other communities have to do it too, even if we can't pay for it, even if, So what I would say, though, is the ultimate backstop here is town meeting. Town meeting can reject an arbitrator's decision from the JLMC. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. The reason why it doesn't happen often is once a decision is made, we can't speak out against it. We can't speak out against that decision. So we need to basically be silent and say, okay, the arbitrator has made a decision and you have to vote on it. We can't tell them vote it down. So once you do that, so the trick then, if John, to your point, is if you want to control for that, you have to educate town meeting on the fact that they can reject those contracts before they come before town meeting, because once they do, your hands are bound. So I
Yeah.
think that could be a component of this future education going forward, which is right. You don't have to say yes to a JLMC arbitrator's decision, but it's just this thought. I understand, Sebastian. Give me 1 second, buddy. Sorry. The other aspect of this, or just in terms of potential next steps, because John, to your point, and to Janet's point, one, time is of the essence. Two, you don't have certain people here, and you want to have them here to have that full discussion on Tuesday. What I might suggest is a rubric going forward in this, especially given Jesse's email from last night. Maybe what we come prepared to discuss on Tuesday is the question writ large. This question of components of the town components of the override. What is necessary and what is not. Janet asked some of those questions today, but I want to answer Jesse's questions to his satisfaction, or to his point, if he wants to make a motion to strip something out of there, that's fine. What I would suggest as a potential framework, though, might be that the subcommittee advance a tiered structure. That is, that if there are things that the subcommittee thinks shouldn't necessarily be in a base override question, but might be at a different level of override, that you look at that and maybe make a recommendation on that front. And the reason why I would say that is I do think it's important to get to Charlie's point, to not give away the store before we get to the full committee. But I think it is important to pressure test our asks. So there's that balance that needs to be struck there, which is I don't want to be out here saying, no, it's got to be all of this. You can't test whether or not this is a valid assumption. I don't want to be in that space. I want this to be tested and people to be comfortable with it. I also don't want to be in a situation where we're negotiating on the overall number. We're kind of negotiating against ourselves without being able to have that conversation in the context of the schools. So that's maybe how I would structure that conversation.
Okie doke. We've given a lot of time to this, and I appreciate that people have been very, thoughtful in their responses. I didn't know what to expect when I floated this idea this morning. But I think this is a discussion that is well worth having. And I look forward to having it at the level of the committee as a whole. And unless others disagree, I think we can probably call this meeting over.
Lincoln's got his hand up, so sorry.
John, can I
go ahead.
just a clarifying question, just for you to think about if you hadn't already, or in the whole subcommittee to think about, is the part A, is that that new growth revenues are applied to capital improvement needs, is that intended to override the select board's current policy of 6% or 6.5% towards capital? Or
No.
okay,
No,
I just wanted
no.
just to clarifying. Yeah,
Good question. No, it'll contribute to that 6.5%. And that much money less, that we'll have to spare, for other things. But what it's intended to do is to steer the discussion away from, well, we could solve this problem if we would just sort of deal with the new growth being, not what we want it to be. And if we can just get that new growth number up there, it's going to solve the problem. Well, we're not getting it up, further than the level that it's been at on average for years now. And so that's kind of a false hope to offer people. And because it's a variable number, it's much more sensible to, put it into the capital improvements program than to have operating budgets hinging on whether you had a good year in new growth or not.
I think it's and just another, again, something you probably already thought about, but a practical consideration, not any kind of flaw of the reasoning, but a practical consideration is if if every year you're looking at this and doing this and you have, you know, as we've had recently, right? If you had in the future have an inflation factor where inflation's at 6%, say, right,
Mhm,
for
mhm.
several years in a row, that would indicate that you'd then be having 3 years or 4 years in a row of overrides on the ballot rather than doing it all in once, all in 3 year chunks as Brookline has. So it's not, I'm just raising it as something to consider. That's all. It's more a practical consideration than a flaw in the reasoning. That's all.
Yeah, well, I think the inflation factor would have to have its own ceiling, it would have to
Yeah.
be one of
Okay.
these, or whichever is less, the lesser, type of things.
Or you could
The,
also, you could also frame it as this is this is what we're going to follow in those situations where an override becomes necessary, not something we're doing every year, but we're at a
yeah,
point as we seem to be, and so we're going to do it within this framework. So going into it, everybody knows I can only go as high as this number, which was
yeah,
missing
yeah.
this
I mean,
time.
perfect example would be, adds a to be determined inflation factor to the 2.5% allowable annual growth up to, but not more than, a 3.5% allowable, annual growth in revenues. That's all. I might actually make that tweak to what's in there. Is everybody ready to go on to other things like shoveling snow?
Yeah, I've been taking notes. I can do the minutes. I'd rather focus on, trying to get some conclusions, on paper with lots of blanks since we haven't,
Why don't you depend on me to do the minutes? Because I'm already pretty familiar with this as it is.
all right, and I'll
Yeah,
work on summarizing the conclusions and the issues that I presented with Chaz, which is a step forward toward what you want. Have we proof tested
yeah,
these
great,
numbers?
great, great. And I'll send Nicole the agenda for next Tuesday's meeting. Sorry.
Right, and I would suggest, just to be on the safe side, I'd schedule Thursday at this point too. Can always be canceled, but we seem to not get to where we need to go.
Okay, okay.
Tuesday and Thursday of next week at 9 a.m. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good day.
Take it
You as
easy.
well.
Bye.